form during this time in China. And these things that we really do get into this profession of education for this campus experience, for the relationships we can form with our colleagues and our students. But you know, the university I was at just prior was the University of Southern California, and that's represented by the photo on the right. And there's a question mark there because I worked and taught there for 6 years, and yet I never set foot on the campus, not once, not for a class, not for a commencement, not for a meeting. And I never met any of my colleagues face to face for 6 years, but we met every week in faculty meetings. I got to know them quite well, build relationships. The entire program was run via Zoom type classroom experience, working with students in from all over the world in this environment. And so what I'm going to do with you all today is share a little bit about what we were able to learn from working in primarily a Zoom classroom, where I was there from 2008 to 2018. And I will be able to have you experience some of those things. So what I'm going to do momentarily is and we'll orient you to our short session today, where we're going to kind of simulate a Zoom class in some respects. Other respects, we'll be talking about what we're doing and why we're doing it to help you take this information and use it in your own practice. So to do that, we're going to be having a topic for discussion and run the class in a simulated fashion. So right now I'm going to share a slide with you that has a question, and this is going to be like beginning the class. I'm going to now pause my camera, take my camera offline for a minute, present a question, and as if you were coming into the Zoom class at the very beginning, you would have a question on the board to think about. I'm going to give you about a minute or so to consider your answer to the question, and then I'll share my camera again when it's time for us to really get started with the time. Okay, I will share the slide now. All right, well, welcome everyone. I appreciate all the responses you'll be able to share in the chat and for the ones you thought on your own. And thank you for even some of your responses to question the questions, always fantastic. So I wanted to just begin this conversation. We'll be sharing some of the research in this topic and also the work that we've done in Zoom. So let's begin by saying that I typically like to begin the class like this with some kind of beginning activity or question in front of the class, and I put my camera off and allow students to filter into the room, because this is a similar experience they have when they're actually in a face-to-face classroom, and they're able to come into the classroom, organize their materials, maybe chat with a friend, get situated, and if there's a question on the screen, It allows them to begin thinking about the topic material, either as a preview or a review. And then I keep my camera off until I'm ready to engage the students, because that's similar to a face-to-face classroom. They know when you approach the podium, for example, or turn on the PowerPoint, you're ready to gain attention. And using the camera as a way to signal attention is a way to better socialize the Zoom space. So this is one of the things that we learned at the University of Southern California. I have given you a little bullet point list here, and I'll give you the link to all the references in the presentation later today and a file for you to take on your own. But here are some of the things that this group of faculty learned with their time working to attempt students to engage as they would in a face-to-face class via Zoom. And you'll see here these 5 points. The first one, to really think about time management. And the lesson was to try and use lecturettes. Try not to speak for more than 10 or 15 minutes before you have some kind of breakout group or whole group activity, some kind of other way to break up the information time. Use a lot of structured discussions and breakouts. For our classes, we would have at least half the time would be in small groups and half the time would be in a large group. Number 2, try and use and share the various tools that you have with you, such as the polling, the chat, the hand raising features. This is important for you to do, and be able to have a behavior of seeking and giving help. It's really important when we're so isolated as faculty members that we even do further work to reach out for others when we're stuck, to offer advice when we find success. This is a really important culture to develop. And then number 4, really worry about number 3, the engagement for students, really using a lot of small group discussion protocols, turn taking rules, which we'll talk about later in the day, is really quite important, because a lot of the ways we manage our relationships face-to-face with social cues, body language cues, are not available to us here in Zoom land. And then 4, thinking about flipping the class. What can you do outside of the class? We did a lot of recorded lectures so that we could have more time for discussion in the classroom. Also writing activities outside the class to then bring the writing into the classroom, also really key. And then finally, we thought maybe we wouldn't be able to know each other or our students as well online as we could face-to-face, but the truth was we really facilitated those relationships because we were so intentional about overcoming the limitations that we actually found ourselves quite surprised with the ability to maintain and create those personal relationships via distance. Now, to go back into our topic area, I had some wonderful chats come in from the question, which I think you have seen as well. Some have talked about the word reticence comes to mind. Some have talked about deference, of waiting for some students that are more older or maybe in a position of higher status or authority to lead. So usually when I'm in a group like this and we want to have a whole group discussion, I would typically provide a question like this for some time to give thought to and some time to even formulate a written answer to. And then when we come to the whole group, I would look at my group of students, and this is quite a large group at over 100, but with a group of 15 to 30, I would look across and I would call on a couple. For example, I may say, well, I would like to maybe ask my new friend, Penny, to share what she had response to the question in just a moment. And that would give Penny an alert to say, okay, I'm now being asked to respond. I've been given a chance to think about it, to write an answer down, and now being given a chance to prepare an oral answer, right? And so when you allow to call on students in that order, after the question, after written time, after warning time, that can prepare students to prepare an answer. And then you can maybe call on 2 or 3. If we had more time, I could call on Penny and 2 or 3 others that would maybe share in response to the question. And then after that, I would ask if anybody else would like to respond. And you can oftentimes find that at that time, some students would volunteer to respond to the prompt afterwards. So I will give Penny a chance. She said she was going to stick around for the session. And if she has any thoughts on this topic, as it's stated, you could just unmute Penny and give us a little insight into how you think about this question.
Of course, I'm still here. So the question is, what are the common beliefs around how students from Asia, like I'm teaching Chinese students for the past 5 years almost. And in my class, especially in the UK, I used to have some Japanese as well, some South Koreans, some Thai students. So I have experience not only with Chinese students. It depends. If you have undergraduate students like I have right now in my class, the first week is just adapting to the Western style. So last week, most of my students, when I was asking them a question directly, they used to stand up to reply. Okay, so my purpose in the first couple of classes is to make them feel comfortable. And I'm like, I'm joking. I mean, no, you don't have to stand up. Please sit down. And the first thing I'm saying to them, just call me Penny. No mom, no dear, no profession, professor. I'm not a professor yet. So I'm like, I'm trying to make them feel comfortable. So I believe that Asian students need to be introduced to the Western style English language classes gradually. They're not familiar with many of our procedures, techniques, methods, and activities. They haven't done peer feedback in their lives. They're shy. They haven't done any seminar discussions, any, research. So you have to go and guide them step by step. And it's an exciting process. It's like a bloom. It's like a flower that you wait for them to bloom and show the colors and how they can develop.
Thank you, Penny. That's wonderful. I really appreciate that. And I'm reading the chat as you're speaking, and Martin also talked about having a routine, working hard to establish routines at the beginning, and having students come into class and explain to them, this is a chance for you to socialize with each other. This is a chance for you to maybe to ask me a question informally. And he said the students were kind of cool to it at first, but with persistence, then he was able to help build that culture in his classroom. That's a fantastic example. So thank you for that. And to your point, in the Zoom classroom with these kind of whole group discussions, I do let the students know that we're going to be able to have a group discussion, and we're going to be able to cue each other in various ways. And we could be using, as I did, a verbal call out to call on students. Students could raise their hand physically in the webcam. That still works. Many students like to still give those physical cues in the webcam. I encourage that. Some students could use the raise your hand feature in the Zoom. Some students would like to chat. So what I tell them is that we're going to have all the lines of communication open, and we're going to fumble through them and see which ones that we find and you find most accessible for us. So I think that's the best way to approach this, is to let them know that it's going to have to be a lot of intentional work, a lot of new ways to communicate, and to be persistent in presenting those opportunities to the students and help to socialize them to those opportunities. Now, what we'll do today is walk through this question in a short 4-step process, a reflective process, where we're going to be present to students' experiences in our classes. We're going to describe their experiences in plain language. We're then going to analyze them from different theoretical possibilities, and then we're going to take a concrete action step. Again, I'll apologize for the brevity with that, but I think you'll be able to understand the process. So to see the issue, many of you have begun to describe this. Here's some research published a few years ago that suggests that the number one issue with Asian students participating in Western style classrooms is their reluctance to participate in discussion. and they posit 2 other reasons. So if you would like to, in the chat, you could respond with which of these reasons, 1, 2, or 3, or another one, do you think are most important? You can vote by just dropping in the number you want to vote for in the chat. I could do this in a poll as well, but I'm also going to take a quick chat poll. Just drop the number in the chat. Or you can put a different answer via text as well, if you prefer. So this is the question: is this some kind of cultural? Is this some kind of language? Is this some kind of academic discourse issue? Is it all the above? Can we prioritize? People are wrestling with the dynamics of these different styles of teaching and learning. And here are some possibilities. What I'm going to show you here is actually some Asian students' description of their class room experiences in terms of participation. Now, if this is small for you, I'd like for you to know that you can access this information on the link that's here in the page. I've also dropped the link into the chat box. Take a moment, read this student language, and the question is, what words pop out to you, really signify something to you? Like in the top left, one student talks about, it was the small words. I thought that was a very interesting phrase, small words. So if you could take a moment to look at this and note to yourself, what is most stand out, most important to your eye, just from the student words, not your opinions of it, but what do they say? Okay, friends, some of you are beginning to share, and I want to thank you for that. So at this point, what I would do is take my students and put them into a breakout room, all right? Now, with this size group and the time we have, we're not going to go through that process today. But what I would ask them to do is to take this information they find important and take it into a breakout room and share it into a file. So I'm going to share with you how I typically manage the file, the document work of that task, and then we're going to talk about breakout rooms. So this is the OneNote file that I just gave you the link for in the chat. And if you'll go here, you'll see that I have set up different breakout rooms, room A, B, C, D, all the way through G. Room A through G are all similar breakout rooms, and they're just for different groups. So this idea, what I would have 7 different groups and send my students there. And I pre-populate this template, and here is the breakout room where I have supplied the information you just saw with the student words and asked the participants to, as I did for you, describe what you notice. And as you all did in the chat, here's some people in the previous group that their answers are here. They typed them directly in the chat, sorry, not in the chat, but in this OneNote file here. And every student is able to participate here via chat, via their keyboard, and also they can still converse with each other in Zoom. And I have my breakout group 1 here, information, and then scrolling down, my second breakout for the class would appear down below. So that way every group, room A, B, C, they have just what they need to complete this work. Now, when I put the students in breakout rooms, it's always important that you give them a few clear ideas before that you send them there. One is you tell the students what exactly they're going to do in the breakout room. Are they going to be asked to take notes and present them back to the class? Are they asked just to discuss and not bring back notes? Are they asked to take notes for themselves and keep them? Or are they asked to actually bring back and have one person from the group, for example, represent what their group said? All of these are very important dynamics to outline to the students before you send them into breakout groups. You can see here, this one says to respond to it and list a phrase. After it is, discuss it with your peers. That's it. There's not being asked to prepare anything to bring back to the whole group. So it's really important to give clear directions. It's also important to give some sense of the amount of time. If it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 20 minutes, it's important that you as the instructor have set the priority so you know how much time you want to allow. You can of course adjust that based on the success or lack of success of the activity, but you do want to have expectations. And then you want to be diligent for supporting any issues that arise. What I do is once students are in breakout groups, I have the ability to go from one room to the next, and visit each breakout room. And this is important, the same way as I would circulate in my physical room, I want to circulate among my small groups in my classroom. So I tell my students that if I come into your room and my camera is not on, that means I'm just listening to your group. Just as if I were walking up to your group and leaning in and listening without interrupting, just checking in, and then I may just move on. But if I have my camera on, then I would like to say something when it's appropriate and be part of the group, either to respond or to give some direction. So just at the beginning of class, I use my camera to suggest that I'm ready to gain attention or not to gain attention in the group with my students. And that's very helpful because oftentimes they'll see that I come into the breakout room, but they, when they do, they are then able to know whether I want to just listen and then continue on, or they need to let me interrupt them. So I'm going to go back now to our slides and note we would step into the analysis phase here. And this is when I would refer you to some of the literature that is in the OneNote file that this is pulled from. Many of you are, I think, rightly questioning the use of the term Asian, Western, International, and I think that's a very compelling discussion to have. You'll see that through the literature. These are the terms that the literature is using, so I use them as well. Some of the literature is 10 years old, and so I think there's an awareness, a better awareness of how we discuss these issues than is in the literature in this discussion. But in that, one of the points of this is when we analyze what we see as sometimes a problem of student participation, this research would suppose that maybe that assumption of a problem is part of our issue as instructors. If we're bringing our Western experiences to the classroom, we can tend to interpret behaviors as maybe being more cultural or more negative. And you can see that on the right side of the screen with the more negative issues here. But the authors suggest that really these can all be seen as positive as well if we as the instructor are willing to expand our view of what engagement and participation is, and to value different ways of participating and not only the ways that we've been conditioned to. And the authors would suggest that the differences are really a result of schooling, that especially in K-12 environments, the systems in international systems in China, for example, are quite different. And it's that actually small c culture of school that is more responsible for the differences than any kind of larger social, economic, or political realities, which are all intriguing points. Not to suggest an answer here, but this is a great point for us to consider. So at this point, what I would do is, in the process, is after we analyze this, we would then say, what would we then choose to act, change in our behavior? And so we would then look at some of the suggestions from the authors in the literature, and they're here, and we could examine the different ones that they suggest. Maybe you think some of these are good or bad, and then maybe offer some of your other ones and begin to actually process some action spaces, right? And then that would give us our motivation and a clear guidance of how to go forward. So just as we did before, I'll scroll down. This would be breakout group 2, when we would think about what we would do and write down our actions in here. And again, you have access to this file. Someone asked again, where do we find the file? I'll just put the link to the file in the chat again. You do want to get this because you can see some interesting discussions here, but also I want you to note, as I promised, I have the references for all the research here that's listed with a short annotation bibliography for you to look through, as well as here I have a document I hope you'll find helpful about teaching a class with Zoom. Everything that we've talked about and more in this time is listed here. And you'll see here, especially I want to direct your attention down to the class activities section. Sorry, didn't mean to click on that. Activities section, where you'll see all kinds of good advice for how to start a class, how to conduct lectures and demonstrations, whole class discussions, breakout sessions, et cetera, et cetera. And it has links to the technical support sections of the Zoom website that will help you actually do the technical piece. Everything here is more, kind of procedural and pedagogical, as you will. Okay, so I know that I'm coming near to the end, and I wanted to leave a few moments for any other comments or questions that I wasn't able to address that have come into the chat, which I'll pause for a moment now. And while I do that, I want to again thank my good friend, my new friend Penny, and all the fantastic people in the TELSIG interest group for inviting me here. It's been fantastic to start my Sunday morning with you. And it's been a fantastic time to be with you and share a little bit about Zoom.
Thank you. Thank you, Clayton. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. Sorry, guys, my connection it's a little bit unstable. Sorry, Ben, did you want to say something?
No, I'm okay. You can continue with your Q&A.
Yes, so there was a question from Claire. How do you ensure that students' requests for help are noticed when working whole class?
That's a great point, Claire. So what I do is I tell the students that if there is something in the chat, then I may miss it because the chat scrolls down. And I will try and always check the chat, but I may miss it. So if you really do need to get my attention, use the raise hand feature in the Zoom participants interface. And I make a commitment every 15 minutes or so, I will check and make sure if a student has a hand up, I will pause and go to that student.
Excellent, thank you. There was one more from Martin. It's more of a practical question. How do you share the OneNote links to groups of students? I believe members of the audience offer suggestions, but I would just like to hear what you usually do.
Yes, what I would do is if I was in my LMS like Moodle, I would probably post links to my rooms in my Moodle link. If I did not have that, then I would just post my link here in the chat like I've done here. You can share it that way.
Yes. I just saw the link. Excellent. And just one more question, just out of curiosity, what do you find particularly challenging in your attempts to engage with students online and help them engage with each other? And what was the most challenging aspect that you faced with your group of students?
Yes. I think what it was to always try something new. I would try many other kinds of discussion group protocols. You'll read about them. And I kept asking the students, which ones do you like better than others? And they said, we don't care. Just keep making it different.
So they wanted new content.
Just wanted new ways of doing things, new little ways to discuss, new ways to do group work, new ways to ask questions. They just keep it different.
It's always yes, something that the students are looking for. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
I got a comment from one of the members of the audience. They're saying, can we also have the slides of the talks? Not all of the links provided seem to be working. I'm not sure if that's referring to Clayton's links or to previous links. Are you talking about? But I think, Clayton, you have shared some links already, haven't you?
Yes, everything I have is in the OneNote file that I've shared.
So it should, the link should, okay, good. That was my mistake, sorry. I thought it was about the links that you have shared. And if you had one piece of advice, one suggestion for everyone who's using Zoom and they find it difficult to, create engaging activities for the for their students, what would that piece of advice be, Clayton?
Yes. I think it would be find ways for you to talk less and students to think, write, or talk more during the time you have them together. And last thing is, don't be afraid of a little silence. We all need time to be quiet and process what's happening. And I tell my students, I call it awkward silence, but it's not awkward because we're friends and we can have a little silence between us and no one's embarrassed by it. So I think those are good tips.
Excellent points, Clayton. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for joining us. We know it's it's a difficult time back in the USA. And Penny, Craig, I'm going to hand over to you now for the Q&A session.
Okay, so I posted the certificate of attendance in the chat box.